risking it all to get to Europe. But Europe keeps pushing them back. Is the bloc violating its own allegiance to uphold human rights, or do EU authorities face an impossible situation? I'm Matthias Lucke, and today's newsmaker is Fortress Europe. War, persecution, and poverty. 3 reasons why people risk their lives and spend their savings to search for safety and a better life for their families. But while asylum seekers are desperate to experience stability and prosperity in Europe, the continent seems equally desperate to make sure they never will. We've watched as parents scale fences, clinging on to their children, crossing seas in flimsy boats, only to be blocked, sometimes with force. The harrowing scenes at the Poland-Belarus border have become commonplace, thousands braving the elements trying to make it onto EU soil, with authorities on both sides blocking their path. Even Germany, considered the EU's most welcoming member, is refusing to take anyone in from this latest crisis.
Diese Menschen sind ja Instrument.
These people are the instruments of a wicked strategy, and that is why we have said, according to our EU values, that we will be offering assistance and aid to these refugees. What we will not do is take in refugees. We will not bow to the pressure and say, we are taking refugees into European countries, as that would mean that this calculated, perfidious plan had then been successful. We won't do it.
But despite repeated pushbacks, thousands continue to attempt the perilous journey to Europe, and the numbers are rising. Between April and June last year, the EU processed just over 48,000 first-time asylum applications. In that same period this year, that number more than doubled to almost 104,000. The majority registered in Germany, which received almost 30,000 first-time applications. France was second, with just over 22,000, and Spain received just over 12,000 applications. But many remain unable to lodge claims because they're being blocked from getting in. This is what awaits people on the periphery of the continent.
These are the key flashpoints in Fortress Europe. The latest crisis has been unfolding at Belarus's border with Poland, as thousands of asylum seekers from Iraq, Syria and Yemen face razor wire fences in freezing temperatures. At the EU's southeastern edge, Greek coast guards have been filmed illegally pushing back refugee boats towards Turkey. Greece is building new camp facilities on its islands that aid agencies are likening to prisons. Further west in the Mediterranean, increasing numbers of people are making the deadly journey from Libya to Italian islands, seeking protection. More than 23,000 of them have been returned to Libya this year, to conditions the IOM describes as unsafe. In the Western Balkans, Croatian authorities are accused of forcibly returning asylum seekers who try to enter from Bosnia-Herzegovina, the majority of whom are Afghans who fled the Taliban. Meanwhile, people hoping for a new life in the UK are crossing the channel in record numbers. 98% claim asylum upon arrival. But the British government is reportedly working on plans to fly them to offshore processing facilities in Albania.
More than half of all EU members now have physical barricades at their external borders. The one thing all countries seem to have in common is the desire to keep people out. Many inside the EU fear a repeat of the refugee influx of 6 years ago. In 2015, more than 1.3 million asylum claims were made. And what followed was a rise in right-leaning political parties, which profited off anti-immigration sentiment. Today, those parties are a force to be reckoned with in countries like Poland, Hungary, Italy, and Denmark. And while the bloc technically has a common asylum policy, in reality, member states simply don't agree. Caught in the middle are the migrants and refugees, left with few options and little hope. Well, to discuss the European Union's response to asylum seekers, I'm joined now from Rome by Christopher Hein, a professor of migration and asylum law at the Guido Carli University. Matthias Lucke is a senior researcher at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy and a former senior economist at the International Monetary Fund. He's also the coordinator of a think tank focusing on migration issues. And in Durham, UK, is Thom Brooks, professor of law and government at Durham University and an immigration advisor to the UK's Labour Party. Thanks all so much for being with us. Thom, I'll start with you. First, I want to get an overall assessment of what we've been seeing over the last 12 months. We know the 2015 refugee crisis caught Europe off guard, and attempts to devise an appropriate united policy was a pretty huge failure. But here we are in 2021, faced with another wave of migration. Has anything improved? Were any lessons truly learned since 2015?
Well, I think a number of lessons were learned. As you say, a number of European Union countries were caught very much off guard, and the EU took a while to address it, but it did. So it created more processing places and improved accommodation and other things to help countries on the front line like Greece, Italy, and others to handle the much larger than anyone had anticipated migration at that time. I think since that time, there's been debates about quotas between EU countries and how burdens might be shared better between different countries. Some take a far more greater share of the responsibility of the EU than other countries do. But I think what has also changed has been COVID. We've seen for the last about 2 years, citizens in the Schengen area normally would be able to go across from France to Germany and back again whenever they would want to, and others similarly in that area, where borders have been put up, not because of trying to create some kind of inhumanity, but because of the health and safety issues of trying to combat the spread of COVID. And so I think that you have this kind of climate of migration really being on halt, people, doing holidays at home rather than going abroad as much as they used to do. People traveling not nearly as much as they used to, many working from home if they can.
Okay, let me ask you though, Thom, I mean,
overall,
overall,
putting on this crisis.
overall, are you satisfied with the approach to migrants and refugees now? Is it the best it can be?
No, I mean, I don't think the system is the best that it can be by a long shot. I think that there's, amongst many other problems, you have the issue of once people arrive, there's the issue of, people arrive, they don't always have passports, they don't always have documentation, and to qualify as a refugee, they need to establish they have refugee status. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have documents to do it, although things like this help, and you certainly need some type of convincing evidence, and this can take a while to investigate. Some countries do it much better than others. So once people already arrive on the shore, there's this kind of long process of trying to determine whether or not people, I mean, everyone in a desperate state enough to make the perilous journeys. So I don't doubt that they all are seeking sanctuary and have real needs, but some will qualify under the convention, and others will not, and that takes a long time to do. And then for those who don't qualify, there's typically a need for some type of extradition treaty. So if someone doesn't qualify, and should be returned to the home country, well, what is the home country? Not everyone is able to establish what that is, and not all countries are deemed safe, and those that are not always places where there's a treaty in place to return the migrants too. So there's a number of very thorny issues of processing and return and other things that are in the mix as well that are not as good as they should be, and they should be ironed out more.
Let me ask Matthias about that then. Is there a better, more effective way to process these thousands, sometimes millions, of asylum applications?
There may be better ways of processing applications on the ground, and you can talk about how the Netherlands are managing to keep a process within 2 weeks to 2 months, and as an asylum procedure drags on for several years sometimes in the case of Germany. But I think the fundamental issue really is that countries, European Union countries, want to be in control of who is coming, immigrating in Europe. And they want to know who is coming. They want to control the number of people coming. They have a sense that they cannot take everybody who might well have a legitimate claim to receive international protection somewhere. And this means we need responsibility sharing both between the European Union and the rest of the world for the protection of refugees, and we need more responsibility sharing within Europe. And neither of these two levels are working well, and I think that is the underlying issue here.
Quickly, Matthias, though, I mean, why is the Netherlands able to do the processing so much more quickly than its EU counterparts?
It's difficult to say why. The fact is that this is what they are doing. They are devoting enough resources. They're making it an issue. They're giving it priority, and this hasn't been happening in the same way in other countries, including my own.
Okay, Christopher, I'd like you to comment on that. I mean, why isn't there a universal approach then in the EU to refugees and asylum seekers and migrants as well, so that the processing could at least, quicker processing could at least relieve some of the burden on all EU countries?
Well, actually, coming back to your question, if things are going well in this moment with regard to arriving refugees and asylum seekers and migrants in Europe, I think it is sufficient to look at the pictures you are distributing in this transmission to see that something is really profoundly wrong. And it is certainly not only a question of speed of procedures to determine who is a refugee and not. Let's take the biggest number of asylum seekers we have in this moment as from September in the European Union. For the first time, Afghans are bigger in numbers than Syrians, the first time after 2014. Afghan asylum seekers are determined in the average of the European countries to 87% to have a refugee status recognized. So we can say that Afghans who arrive are almost all refugees. So if we speak about speeding up procedures, first of all, there is a need to introduce a mechanism of saying you are from a particular country or from a particular area of a country like Afghanistan, so prima facie you are entitled to international protection. This possibility so far is not established in the law of the European Union. It is there in some member states, but insufficiently.
Right. And
so
why is it not, though? That is...
If we want to speak about crisis, we are not certainly in front of a migration crisis, but of a refugee crisis.
Why is it, though? I mean, you use the example of Afghanistan. I mean, if those are supposed to be recognized refugees, why is it that they sit in limbo for so long? And why have so many actually had applications rejected at the border?
Well, rejected at the border, we speak now, of course, about a very recent development after the 15th of August when the Taliban took power in Kabul. And the latest figures we have is this from September this year on the number of asylum seekers. We see that the numbers tripled in the course of the very few months with regard to Afghans. Why are they not recognized immediately or far more speedily? I think there is always the fear that we see also in the debate in this moment that it may create a pull factor, that the easier it is in the European Union to get international protection, the more will come, the more will come. This is the underlying fear. This is also expressed with regard to the situation now between Poland and Belarus, because of course it is no difficulty at all for Germany and other member states of the European Union to accept between 3,000 and 5,000 people who are stuck there in these miserable conditions, as we see also in your pictures. But it is always said, okay, if we transfer from Poland a certain number of these refugees, then many others may be encouraged to come. But experiences in the past show very clearly that this mechanism of creating pull factors is simply not true, but it is all the time utilized in order to have the people outside the, for the moment, virtual walls of the European Union.
Right. Thom, let me turn to you for a minute. I'm going to deviate, actually, if we can, for a second from policy. I'm hoping you can help me address this, understand this a little bit better, because we're looking at a lot of migrants and refugees, of course, trying to come in from the periphery of the EU, from countries, for example, like Bosnia, trying to cross into Croatia in order to enter the European Union. Why is there an insistence to get into a country like Croatia rather than an Iraqi or a Syrian or an Afghan refugee staying and applying for asylum in a country like Bosnia, for example, that has a Muslim majority population, some majority? What is it about the refugees and migrants that are insisting now about only entering specific countries in the EU when there may be safety for them on the periphery?
Well, I mean, it depends on, things are very much reliant on individual circumstances. However, I think one thing I would say as a general statement is that you do find refugees or migrants more broadly looking to go to certain countries in particular because of some what I'll call a cultural or family ties. So you have large communities, relatively large communities of different types of refugees in different countries. It differs from place to place. For example, in the UK, where I speak to you now, you have most of the people who travel across the border here are from countries that were once part of the British Empire once upon a time, but are no longer part of the empire. In fact, many of the countries would have had full British citizenship actually 100 years ago, which was then later scaled back. So I think it is parts kind of seeking out relatives or having some type of connection from their native country somewhere else, maybe not in the first country in the European continent they get to. That is an attraction for them. And of course, why would you not want a positive support network to be there for you rather than being somewhere alien all by yourself? And the second is, of course, connections to where there's cultural or historical ties. Being originally from the United States, coming to Britain was a kind of one of the more easy things to do, given the connections between my two countries, and I'm hardly alone with that, and others do the same. There's large South Asian migrant communities in Britain and other communities here too, and that's an attraction for people who want to come here. It'll be different for each member state.
Matthias, if you have a comment, go ahead. If not, I wanted to ask you about another factor in all of this. Go ahead.
Well, I guess as an economist, I can be forgiven for pointing out that most people come from poor countries and migrate to rich countries. So the chance of having a higher material standard of living is obviously very much part of people's migration aspirations. And of course, networks, as Thomas pointed out, also feature in. But that is, I think, an important part of the issue that would arise with any distribution mechanism for refugees, asylum seekers in Europe. A lot of refugees would not just want to go where that mechanism would want to allocate them, but people want to go to very few countries in Northern Europe and Central Europe. Sweden is one of them, Germany is one of them, and these countries could very quickly feel that they are overburdened. And there is no easy solution to that. There's a lot of talk, obviously, about relocation of refugees, but there are few ways of making sure that people actually stay where they are supposed to be if they see better opportunities for them elsewhere, especially within the Schengen system, where they can travel freely. And in fact, we have had Afghan refugees who were recognized in Greece, coming to Germany, applying for asylum again, of course being rejected, because they were protected in Greece, but then a German court said you cannot return these people to Greece because living conditions for refugees in Greece are awful, which is probably true, but that just drives it home that some countries may legitimately think that they could end up being overburdened unless there were firm restrictions on the external borders of the EU.
Let me change tact here, because I think there's another very important strain in all of this that needs to be addressed. Some say it might even be the link that's really missing here, and that is trying to break, some people are even calling it the supply chain, when it comes to cracking down on people smugglers and the scammers that sometimes lure, in the case we're seeing with Belarus and Poland, actual travel agents that say, we're going to help you get to Europe because Europe needs workers. 1.2 million workers are needed now in Europe, so this is why you can get through. Then, of course, there are the people smugglers, horrible criminal networks that profit greatly from the plight of the most desperate people. So, Christopher, what can be done to stop the criminality involved in supplying these immigrants, the refugees and migrants, getting them to EU borders and some into the EU?
Smugglers are there because there is a market for smugglers. There is a demand. And why is this demand there? Because the people have no other choice than to reach a European country, rather than to pay smugglers and to go on very dangerous journeys through the sea or through the forests or deserts.
Christopher, for example, though, now that we're seeing many return, thousands or hundreds at least, returning to northern Iraq from Belarus, they kind of did have a choice. And there was a definite supply chain issue there, fed by scamming agencies and human smugglers that took advantage of an opportunity.
Sure. There is a market, because so many people actually, of course, want or have the need to reach a European country. In many cases of many nationalities, not only Afghans, because they are really in need of international protection, or others certainly driven by economic reasons, but sometimes also by family reasons. Just to recall, there are studies indicating that the driver for moving within the European Union from one country to another, the so-called secondary movement, is dictated by the wish or the need to reach a country where there is a link, where there are family, relatives, communities, as already spelled out. This is very clear. So when you want to really crack down on smugglers, of course, you have to do it with repressive means of police and intelligence. But at the same time, you have to see that the market is going down by offering more places for legal and protected arrival. Of course, according to certain criteria. But when the people have a chance to have a legal entry into a European country, they would think twice before paying a smuggler. This is clear.
Fair enough. Matthias, we only have a few minutes left, and there was one issue I wanted to address with you because this seems to be your area of specialization. When we look at the mentality of people, especially in Eastern Europe right now, that have moved further and further to the right and are truly, there's a xenophobia level there that seems to exceed some other European countries. I'm wondering if these former Soviet, now EU states like Poland, some of the Baltic states, have a particular complex with foreigners because of what they experienced under the Soviet Union and having what they see as their populations diluted by forced Russian immigration, their languages threatened. Is that playing a role now in the attitude that we're seeing towards a number of Eastern European countries being particularly reluctant to take in any refugees or migrants?
I'm sure you get all sorts of very weird narratives all over the place, but say in the case of Poland, Poland has recently had about 1.5 million at least Ukrainian labor migrants coming in, and they have been welcomed, and some of them have been given permanent status. And now, of course, these countries you may consider culturally similar, and they even speak similar languages. But after all, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union in the old days, and now people do get along happily, and there seems to be no issue with the integration of these people. There have been other narratives about Muslims and other groups from far-off countries. I'm not sure how important that is. We have done quite a bit of research in different European countries, and what we found is that in a lot of countries, people do appreciate international protection for refugees, and they are willing for their countries to contribute to international protection for refugees. They also want to remain in control. So the idea that any number of refugees could come, or any refugee could just decide in and of themselves that they want to come to a particular country and go there and be received there, that is something that doesn't go down well with the voting publics of West European countries. But otherwise, I'm sorry, not just West European countries, but we looked at Poland and Hungary as well, and the differences were not large. So a lot of people are in favor of protecting refugees when this can be done in a controlled way and the numbers can be checked and there's an understanding that integration could actually happen and there won't be that the reception capacity of countries won't be overstretched.
Okay, Matthias Lucke, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank Christopher Hein and Thom Brooks also for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and to our viewers for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter @the_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.